This is the starting lineup that Steve Kerr can roll out tonight. 25 combined All-Star selections between the 5 All-Stars who will start the game tonight in L.A. against the L.A. Clippers. But, Griff, you know as well as anybody, a fantasy lineup doesn't always work, and that's true in most sports. But we'll get to the long-term sort of chemistry issues and rotations and all that stuff. But just for tonight, are you more interested in the fit or how Cuz looks on the floor physically?
I think how he looks just for tonight would be the thing that I care about. The way they use him will be meaningful as well. If he does, in fact, play in bursts, then you can sort of assume from that the sports science department in Golden State is sort of overseeing this return to play protocol. If he were to go out there and just be Boogie all of a sudden and play his normal minutes, that'd be even harder for them in terms of assimilating him into the group. So I think it works out well for everybody that he is coming back from such a major injury. We're about to find out if you can have too much of a good thing, Sekou.
Yeah.
What he brings to the table is not what they lack. So it'll be really interesting. And I love Steve Kerr's comment. We're either going to be in really big trouble or we're going to be off to the races, and there'll be no in between.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what kind of sweet spots he can find in a crowded starting 5 where, you know, everybody's a threat. Draymond, as much as anybody, you would think would have a huge adjustment to make with Boogie coming on. But just where do you find those sweet spots in the offense, particularly if you're Boogie Cousins, to be effective but not be overbearing, to not be so deliberate about trying to find your own rhythm that you take away from the group. And I'm guarantee you that's on his mind as well. He's probably trying to figure out, how do I do this without making a mess of what's going on, which is fantastic. I know we tend to think the sky's falling if the Warriors aren't undefeated, basically, at this time of year. The media is, you know, pulling their hair out. But they're fine. I mean, they showed us the other night that there's still plenty of distance between them and whoever the challengers are supposed to be, Denver, namely, in the Western Conference. So now how do you do this if you're Boogie and do it subtly? Do it without disrupting the flow of a team that, let's be honest, doesn't actually need you in the way that we think about getting a player of this caliber back into your lineup for the first time all year would mean to other teams.
Well, in every possible way, he needs them more than they need him, and that includes big picture in terms of his next contract, his career, etc. He's got every incentive to not only play well, but to fit in with this team over the next few months before the postseason. It's interesting, though. They're doing better than fine right now. I mean, they've won 6 in a row, 8 of their last 9. They're averaging 138 points a game over their last 4 games. Offensively, they don't need another scorer, and at their best, it's a team where the ball is popping all over the place. Cuz is a good passer, maybe not an elite passer, but a good passer certainly. How does he fit in best?
Well, I think what's really interesting in this circumstance is it's going to get worse before it gets better. There's no way Boogie can show up, become Boogie over time, and not detract a little bit from what they do initially. He has to. And where that becomes really problematic and where I say we're going to find out whether or not you can have too much of a good thing, Klay Thompson and Draymond Green have found themselves. These last 9 games, Klay Thompson is on an altogether different level in terms of what he's producing. We see here DeMarcus's timeline in terms of his return to play. During this period of time, particularly the last 9 games, what you've seen is Golden State is the best version of themselves they've been the entire time that Boogie has been there. And it's because Klay Thompson is back to being the Klay Thompson that can't miss. He's making 49% of his threes in the last 9 games. Draymond Green is making 38% of his threes after making 22% before that. And here's the graphic we have of the breakdown. The impact he has on these guys, when it took them this long to find their stride, that's what's really interesting. Look at how good Draymond and Klay have been, how much they're contributing to what they're doing. It has to get worse before it gets better when you're playing that well.
Sure.
The one other guy that nobody talked about in this entire scenario, what does this do to Kevon Looney? You know, a guy you've leaned on throughout the course of this season, early when Damian Jones was in the starting lineup and playing well early. Kevon Looney was your security blanket.
Right.
You had to go to him after Jones gets hurt. How does this change his role, and does it do anything to his demeanor in terms of the minutes you're going to get out of him with that second unit, which should be significant? You know, if you can bring him in with that second group and get quality minutes out of a guy who's basically been your starter for most of this year. But nobody's talking about Looney right now, and I'm curious how he responds to this change.
It's a good question, and I might argue that Looney is a better fit with the starting unit than DeMarcus Cousins. Is it a sure thing? And if it is the medical protocol that's requiring Cuz to start because of the warm-up, for instance, is it a sure thing in your mind that when he gets his footing, no pun intended, that he'll be a starter for the rest of the season?
I would assume so. I would think that coming off the bench is not something that he was really open-minded to. I'm going to guess that that's the case, having no knowledge of the situation. You could certainly make a case that coming off the bench makes it possible for them to get another level off of their bench that they don't have.
And play completely
Depth is not a
differently,
strength
right?
of this team.
Yeah.
And you could give him that second unit and run things in a completely different fashion. I'll tell you, Sekou, the one thing that really stands out to me, and it's meaningful that we're watching Rockets highlights here. James Harden became a phenomenon the last, 15 games?
Yeah.
Since Chris Paul went out?
Right.
Because there's no misunderstanding. James is going to take all the shots. He's going to get all the usage, and everyone on the court is going to continue to play with the same zeal defensively and do their job. They don't care if James takes all the shots. Well, these guys were already spitting the bit a little bit earlier when KD and Draymond and Steph couldn't find their rhythm together. Everybody wanted to point fingers a little bit. Now, Steph never does because I think he's a perfect leader in that situation. But they obviously were struggling to find themselves. Now that they're finally in the rhythm they're in and everyone's willing to play the role they're playing, you're going to ask Draymond Green, your dirt-working overachiever, yeah, I know you really enjoy playmaking, but we're going to take that away from you too, and you think he's going to play defense with the same zeal? It's going to take some time. They'll get there because they're all about the right things. It could get worse, and it could get a lot worse before it gets better. So what Steve Kerr said, we can't panic here. And I know Warriors fans won't because it's like a given in their mind that they're going to win.
They've reached that point. Time for the road ahead presented by Dodge. Tonight is the first of a 5-game road trip, and I don't know if it was at all purposeful or not, but it seems to me that's probably a good thing for the Warriors to introduce Cuz on the road as they go out on this trip, work him into the rotation here over the next couple of weeks. Starting with the Clippers tonight. Remember the last time they were in LA to face the Clippers, you had the Durant, Draymond Green dust up. Monday, they stick around for LA. Then they head east, Washington, Boston, and Indiana.
It's an interesting stretch, too. None of these are gimme games. You know, all of these games that they're getting ready to step into should be competitive. You know, raucous environments. You know, you got the world champs coming to your building. If you're these other teams, you want to take a shot at them, and you get a shot at them with, Boogie in the lineup and them trying to adjust and make that transition. So very tricky instances for the Warriors here. I also think we haven't mentioned this as much. You got to be careful not to disrupt what Steph and KD have going right now, too, because they are probably playing as well as they have at the same time for this long a stretch since they've been together. You know, injuries or whatever else has always really interrupted that opportunity to see how they would fare. Steph's playing at a nuclear level, and KD's bananas, and nobody even discusses it.
Steph's hit 28 threes his last 3 games. It's the most in NBA history.
Yeah.
Tied his own record.
Exactly. I mean, so you've got these two guys both playing at MVP levels in their own right. And now you're asking everybody else to make way for another potentially dominant force. Somebody has to take a step back. And that's where the give and take is going to be interesting. I'm not letting Klay Thompson go back to wherever he was.
Right.
Klay has to stay aggressive and stay in a rhythm. You mentioned Draymond. That's the one guy you think to yourself, who can come out of that mix and allow Boogie opportunities to get to the spots and in the spaces that he likes? It's Draymond. And I don't want to lose Draymond either. So Steve Kerr's got a tough job ahead.
And it'll be fun, too, to think about Draymond and Boogie together. Denver right now is really zigging while everybody else zags by playing two bigs quite often. Jokic and Plumlee play high-low together. They're both making plays for each other.
Right.
Draymond Boogie high-low is really interesting when you run the guard split on one side, KD in the corner. But what that means is they all have to embrace there is no number one here. There's no number two here. It's whoever the ball happens to find that night. And if they play the way Steve Kerr wants to play, KD and Steph will be fine because they're truly transcendent. the people who get hurt the most by this are the people who need to be fed once in a while.
Right. Also be interesting to see what happens if they lose some of these games because things are disrupted. And these guys know well enough that it's hard to come back from an injury of that magnitude. I assume they'll, close ranks around Cuz. But what if he takes some heat? What's his reaction? How does that impact the team as well? Bunch of questions to be answered over the next few weeks with DeMarcus Cousins, whose Warriors career begins tonight in L.A.